Imagine you're at the airport, ticket in hand, excitement buzzing through your veins. Your dream trip is just one boarding pass away. But as you step up to the counter, the agent suddenly shakes their head. Sorry, you can't board this flight. No explanation, no valid reason, just a cold, dismissive rejection. That's exactly what happened to a black teenager named James Carter. But what no one expected was what happened next. Just minutes later, the CEO of the airline himself showed up, and what he did left every passenger at the gate in stunned silence. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's a story of redemption, power, and an offer so shocking it changed everything. Stay with me, because you won't believe how this ends. Welcome to Mr. Robert's story, where we bring you the most unbelievable real-life events that will leave you speechless. Today, we're diving into a shocking incident at an airport where a black teenager was denied a boarding pass for no apparent reason. But what happened next was completely unexpected. Even the airline CEO had to step in with a jaw-dropping offer. Was this an act of discrimination, or was there something deeper going on? Stick around, because this story will change the way you see air travel forever. James Carter, a 17-year-old high school senior, had been waiting for this day for months. He was about to board a flight to New York for the biggest opportunity of his life, a national science competition where he would present his groundbreaking project on renewable energy. Winning this competition could mean scholarships, recognition, and the chance to work with some of the brightest minds in the country. Dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and carrying only a neatly packed backpack, James arrived at the airport feeling confident, excited, and ready to embark on this life-changing journey. With his ticket and ID in hand, he approached the airline counter, expecting a routine check-in. The woman at the desk took one glance at his documents and hesitated. Her expression shifted from neutral to something more unreadable. After a few awkward seconds, she handed the ticket back and said flatly, "I'm sorry, but you can't board this flight." James blinked in confusion. "What do you mean? I have a valid ticket." The agent didn't even check her screen. She simply repeated, "You're not cleared for this flight. Please step aside." Passengers behind James shifted impatiently, some glancing over, others ignoring the scene. James' heart started pounding. This didn't make sense. He had booked his ticket months in advance, received confirmation, and had all the required documentation. Trying to stay calm, he asked, "Is there something wrong with my ticket? Can you check again?" But the agent just shook her head. "Sir, you need to step aside." At that moment, James noticed something odd. Other passengers with similar tickets were being let through without issue. Business travelers, families, even solo travelers his age. The only difference? He was the only black teenager in line. A sinking feeling formed in his stomach. Was this racial profiling? James took a deep breath. He wasn't going to let this slide. "I need to speak to a supervisor," he demanded, standing his ground. The woman sighed, rolled her eyes slightly, and called for a supervisor. A few minutes later, a man in a navy blue airline uniform arrived. He barely glanced at James before saying, "What's the issue?" James repeated what had happened, showing his ticket and ID once more. The supervisor gave them a brief look and then, without even typing anything into the system, said, "Unfortunately, we can't let you board this flight. You'll need to rebook." James' frustration turned into disbelief. "Why? What's wrong with my ticket?" The supervisor didn't answer. Instead, he just gestured toward the side and muttered, "Security, please escort this passenger away from the gate." Passengers around them started noticing the tension. A woman near the boarding area frowned, whispering to her husband. Another traveler pulled out their phone, subtly recording. James felt his hands shake with frustration. He wasn't causing a disturbance. He wasn't being aggressive. He was simply asking for a valid reason why he was being denied boarding. Yet, here he was, being treated like a security threat, while other passengers strolled past him onto the plane without a second glance. Feeling utterly humiliated, James pulled out his phone and called his mother. The moment she picked up, his voice cracked, "Mom, they're not letting me on the plane." His mother, a lawyer and an advocate for civil rights, immediately knew something was wrong. "What do you mean they're not letting you on? What reason did they give?" James swallowed hard. "None. They won't tell me." His mother's voice turned sharp. Hand the phone to the supervisor. James did as she asked, but the supervisor refused to take it. We don't speak to passengers' relatives, he said dismissively. That was the last straw. James' mother hung up and immediately took to Twitter, posting about the incident with the airline's name, the flight number, and a demand for an explanation. Within minutes, the tweet started gaining traction. People began tagging the airline's official account, questioning why a young black teenager with a valid ticket was being denied boarding with no reason given. James stood there, feeling helpless, but something was happening. Passengers started speaking up. A middle-aged woman near the gate walked over and asked the supervisor, "Why exactly is he being denied? I was on the same reservation class, and I just walked through." The supervisor looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, this does not concern you." "Oh, I think it does," she said firmly. "Because if he can't board, then I need to know if there's a risk for the rest of us." More passengers began murmuring. Someone else pulled out their phone and tweeted, "Just witnessed a black teen being denied a flight with no reason. This is not okay." The tension in the air was growing. The airline staff shifted nervously as they realized the situation was spiraling out of control. And then, just when it seemed like James would be escorted away in humiliation, something no one expected happened. The murmurs at the gate turned into silence as a tall, well-dressed man in a suit appeared, walking toward the counter with purpose. Flanked by 2 security personnel, his presence alone made everyone stop and stare. The gate agent's face went pale. The supervisor stiffened. Because the man approaching wasn't just another passenger. It was the airline's CEO. And what he was about to do would change everything. The entire boarding area fell silent as the CEO strode toward the counter. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone commanded attention. James stood frozen, not sure what to expect. The supervisor, who had just dismissed James minutes ago, suddenly looked tense. The CEO stopped in front of James, looking him in the eyes before turning to the airline staff. His voice was calm but firm. "Can someone explain to me why this young man has been denied boarding?" The supervisor hesitated, glancing at the gate agent, who now looked like she wanted to disappear. The CEO's gaze didn't waver. He was waiting for an answer. The gate agent finally cleared her throat and mumbled, "There was an issue with his ticket." The CEO raised an eyebrow. "An issue? What kind of issue?" She shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the supervisor for help. He tried to step in, straightening his tie. We suspected there was a booking error, sir." The CEO's eyes narrowed. "Did you check the system?" Silence. Neither of them had actually bothered to check. The growing crowd of passengers watched, some whispering, others recording on their phones. The tension was thick, and everyone knew the staff had been caught. James took a deep breath and spoke up. "Sir, I have my confirmation email, my ID, and my ticket. No one has given me a real reason why I can't board. I just want to get to my destination." The CEO nodded, turning back to the staff. "Run his ticket through the system. Right now." The gate agent's hands trembled slightly as she typed. After a few seconds, the screen lit up and her face paled. James' ticket was perfectly valid. There was no booking issue, no system error, nothing that should have prevented him from boarding. The CEO exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Then, he did something no one expected. He turned to James and said, "I deeply apologize for what just happened. This is unacceptable." Then, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, he looked at the staff and said, "This young man is boarding this flight." Immediately, the supervisor gulped and quickly nodded. The gate agent, flustered, printed out a new boarding pass and handed it to James, avoiding eye contact. But the CEO wasn't done yet. He turned back to James. "How long was this delay?" James glanced at his phone. "Almost 40 minutes, sir." The CEO sighed and looked at his watch. Then, he pulled out his phone and made a quick call. The words that came next shocked everyone. "I need to make arrangements for a special passenger upgrade. First-class seating, priority boarding, and access to our premium lounge services, for life." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The CEO had just given James a lifetime VIP membership, something reserved for the airline's most elite travelers. James' eyes widened. "Wait, what?" The CEO gave him a small, reassuring smile. Consider this our way of making things right. But more importantly, I want you to know that you belong here. No one should ever be made to feel otherwise." The crowd broke into applause. Some passengers patted James on the back, while others glared at the embarrassed airline staff. The gate agent's face was red, and the supervisor looked like he wanted to vanish. But the CEO wasn't finished. He turned back to them, his voice turning ice cold. "After this flight takes off, I want both of you in my office. We need to have a serious conversation about what just happened here." The weight of those words hung in the air. The staff members nodded quickly, knowing that their actions had been noticed at the highest level. James, still in shock, took his new first-class boarding pass and walked toward the gate. Passengers clapped as he finally made his way onto the plane. Just before stepping inside, he turned back and met the CEO's gaze. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice filled with gratitude and disbelief. The CEO gave him a nod. "You earned this, James. Now go make the most of your opportunity." As James walked down the jet bridge, the realization hit him. What had started as a humiliating moment of discrimination had turned into something completely unexpected. The tables had turned in a way no one had seen coming. But the story wasn't over yet, because what happened after James landed would make even bigger waves. As James settled into his first-class seat, his mind was still racing. Just an hour ago, he had been humiliated at the gate, treated as if he didn't belong. Now, he was sipping a complimentary drink, wrapped in the comfort of a luxury seat with legroom that seemed to stretch for miles. Flight attendants greeted him warmly, addressing him by name, and even the captain made a brief stop by his seat to personally welcome him aboard. It was surreal, but James knew this was bigger than him. This wasn't just about a flight upgrade or even an apology. Something deeper had been exposed, and people were paying attention. By the time the plane took off, his mother's tweet had already gone viral. Major news outlets picked up the story, social justice advocates demanded answers, and thousands of people flooded the airline's social media pages with comments. The public wasn't satisfied with just an apology, they wanted accountability. Meanwhile, James was determined to shift his focus back to why he was traveling in the first place. He had worked hard for this moment. The science competition wasn't just another event. It was a stepping stone to his future. He had poured months into developing his project, perfecting every detail. He refused to let what happened at the airport define his trip. The flight was smooth, and before he knew it, James was landing in New York. As he stepped off the plane, he had no idea that another surprise was waiting for him. A small crowd stood near the baggage claim, holding signs with his name. For a second, he panicked. Was this a mistake? Was he in trouble? But then, he recognized a familiar face, his mother. She had flown in ahead of him, knowing he might need support after what happened. As he rushed over to her, she pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. But James wasn't the only one being welcomed. Standing beside his mother were several news reporters, their cameras already rolling. His story had spread like wildfire, and people wanted to hear directly from him. One reporter stepped forward. "James, can you tell us in your own words what happened at the airport?" James hesitated. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this. He was a student, not an activist. But he knew this was bigger than just his personal experience. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. "I was denied my boarding pass without any explanation. I asked for a reason, and they refused to give me one. It wasn't until the CEO arrived that they finally checked my ticket, and it turned out there was never a problem at all." The reporter nodded. "Do you believe this was an act of discrimination?" James didn't want to be reckless with his words, but he also knew the truth. "I can't say for sure what was going through their minds, but I do know this. I was the only black teenager in that line, and I was the only one stopped. That's not a coincidence." The cameras flashed as more reporters jumped in with questions. "How do you feel about the airline's response?" James thought about the CEO, the way he had personally stepped in, the lifetime membership he had given him. "I appreciate what the CEO did. He made things right for me. But I also think this shouldn't have happened in the first place. If he hadn't seen that tweet, would I still be stuck at that gate? Would anyone have cared?" The crowd murmured in agreement. That was the real issue. The CEO had done the right thing, but only after the public had forced his hand. What about the people who didn't have their stories go viral? How many others had been turned away without anyone ever knowing? James' mother stepped in. This isn't just about James. This is about making sure no other black child, no other young person of color, has to go through this humiliation just to get on a plane they paid for. The reporters continued asking questions, but James' focus shifted. He had a competition to get to, and he wasn't going to let anything distract him. Over the next 2 days, James poured all his energy into his presentation. He stood before judges, industry leaders, and fellow students, explaining his research on renewable energy with passion and confidence. The competition was fierce, but James had something no one else did. A story of resilience that fueled his determination. When the winners were announced, James held his breath. Then, the judge called his name. First place. The crowd erupted in applause as James stepped forward to receive his award. He had done it, not just despite what had happened, but because of it. The experience had tested him, but it had also made him stronger. As he stood on that stage, holding his trophy, he realized something. This wasn't just about one flight or one competition. It was about breaking barriers, proving his worth, and making sure no one could ever tell him where he did or didn't belong. What James didn't know was that his story was about to spark an even bigger movement, one that would reach far beyond just one airline. James' victory at the science competition was just the beginning. The moment he stepped off that stage with his award in hand, the world started paying even closer attention. What had started as an act of discrimination at an airport had now turned into a viral story of resilience, justice, and unexpected redemption. The airline, still under intense public scrutiny, released an official statement apologizing for the incident. But it wasn't enough. People wanted real change. Pressure mounted as activists, lawyers, and politicians began demanding answers. News outlets ran feature stories, analyzing patterns of racial discrimination in air travel. Passengers of color started sharing their own experiences of being unfairly targeted, delayed, or even removed from flights. What happened to James wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much bigger problem. The CEO, realizing the gravity of the situation, didn't stop at just issuing an apology. He scheduled a press conference to publicly address the controversy. The room was packed with reporters as he stepped onto the stage, flanked by senior executives. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but serious. "What happened to James Carter should never have happened. Our investigation has confirmed that there was no legitimate reason to deny him boarding. This was an unacceptable failure on our part." Cameras flashed as he continued. "Effective immediately, we are launching a full-scale review of our boarding policies, increasing staff training on racial bias, and implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Additionally, we are inviting James Carter and his family to help us shape these new policies, because no one should ever be treated unfairly simply for the color of their skin." The announcement made headlines. The airline was not only admitting fault, but actively working to fix the issue. But the biggest shock came next. The CEO cleared his throat and added, "And finally, to ensure that James Carter's future is never limited by the actions of others, our airline is awarding him a full college scholarship." Gasps echoed across the room. A college scholarship? The gesture was completely unexpected. Reporters scrambled to confirm what they had just heard. But it was true. The airline had decided to fund James' entire education. It wasn't just about making amends. It was about investing in a young man who had shown the world what true perseverance looked like. James and his mother were watching the press conference live from their home. When the CEO made the scholarship announcement, they were stunned. James' mom covered her mouth in disbelief, tears welling in her eyes. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling, "do you realize what this means?" He did. It meant that no matter what, he could go to college without worrying about tuition. It meant that his dream of becoming an environmental engineer wasn't just possible, it was guaranteed. Minutes later, his phone buzzed with a call from the airline's CEO himself. James answered hesitantly. "James," the CEO said, "I know an apology can't undo what happened, but I hope this helps. You have a bright future ahead of you. We want to be part of making sure nothing holds you back." James took a deep breath. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate this. But I also want to make sure no one else goes through what I did." The CEO's voice was firm. That's exactly why we want you involved. Help us make real changes. Your voice matters. James agreed. And just like that, a new chapter of his life began. Not just as a student, but as an advocate for fairness and equality in air travel. Over the next few months, James worked closely with the airline's diversity team, helping to design new policies that would prevent racial discrimination at boarding gates. He spoke at conferences, sharing his experience and pushing for systemic change. His story inspired other airlines to review their own policies, sparking a nationwide conversation. But the most surreal moment came when he received a letter from the White House. The president had heard his story and wanted to meet him. Weeks later, James found himself sitting in the Oval Office, shaking hands with the leader of the country. "Young man," the president said, "you turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. That's leadership." James left the White House that day knowing that his journey had just begun. What started as a humiliating moment at an airport had turned into a national movement. He had gone from being denied a boarding pass to being given a platform to change the world. And as he prepared for his first day of college, fully funded thanks to the airline, he knew one thing for sure. No one would ever tell him he didn't belong again. What started as an unfair denial at an airport turned into a life-changing moment for James Carter. From facing discrimination to winning a national competition, earning a lifetime first-class membership, and even receiving a full college scholarship, James turned injustice into an opportunity for change. His story sparked national conversations, forced airlines to rethink policies, and proved that standing up for yourself can make a difference. But this isn't just about one person. It's about ensuring fairness for everyone. If you believe in standing against discrimination, share this story and help spread the message. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Robert's Story for more inspiring content.